As Prime Minister, Gordon Brown oversaw the devolution of powers in Northern Ireland, the withdrawal of troops from Iraq, and the world's first ever Climate Change Act. Climate Change Act 2008, to set a target for the year 2050 for the reduction of targeted greenhouse gas emissions. Counter-Terrorism Act 2008, to confer further powers to gather and share information for counter-terrorism and other purposes. Britain's longest-serving modern Chancellor of the Exchequer. He was appointed Chancellor in May 1997, when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, through to June 2007 when he started as Prime Minister himself. Gordon Brown was born in Scotland and grew up in the industrial town of Kirkcaldy. He started at Edinburgh University aged 16, becoming the youngest fresher there since the war. It was at university that he began to have problems with his sight and doctors diagnosed him with a detached retina, which was caused by an injury he received in his final game for his school rugby team. He gained a first-class honours degree in history and became the youngest ever Rector of Edinburgh University in 1972. Gordon Brown became MP for Dunfermline East in the 1983 general election with a majority of 11,000 and shared his first office in the House of Commons with Tony Blair, where they became friends. Later he became Shadow Chancellor and backed Tony Blair for the leadership of the Labour Party. Working together they won a landslide majority in 1997. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer during the longest ever period of economic growth. He also made the Bank of England independent and announced, at the Gleneagle Summit in 2005, an agreement to support the world's poorest countries and deal with climate change. His passion for global justice was shown in his negotiation to cancel the debts of the world's poorest nations and the tripling of the development budget. It was during his time as Chancellor that he proposed to Sarah Macaulay and 7 months later they were married at their home in North Queensferry. Gordon Brown became Prime Minister on June 27, 2007 after Tony Blair left office. During his time as Prime Minister he oversaw changes such as the introduction of neighbourhood policing in every area, a legally enforceable right to early cancer screening and treatment, and the world's first ever Climate Change Act, which was implemented in autumn 2008. The greatest challenge he faced in office was the worldwide financial crisis and the following recession. In April 2009, he hosted the G20 summit in London where world leaders pledged to make an additional $1.1 trillion available to help the world economy through the crisis and restore credit, growth, and jobs. They also pledged to improve financial supervision and regulation. UK combat operations in Iraq, which had begun during his predecessor's time in office, came to an end under Gordon Brown. British forces withdrew from the country at the end of April 2009. He regularly visited Iraq and Afghanistan and, in December 2009, he became the first Prime Minister for some considerable time to stay in a war zone when he stayed overnight in Kandahar, Afghanistan. He became heavily involved in international negotiations to reach an agreement to replace the Kyoto Treaty and, in December 2009, he attended the United Nations Summit in Copenhagen. Following the summit, he pledged to lead an international campaign to turn the agreements reached at Copenhagen into a legally binding treaty. During his time in office, he worked with his Irish counterpart Brian Cowan to negotiate the devolution of policing and justice powers in Northern Ireland. An agreement was finally reached in February 2010 and the powers were passed to Northern Ireland's government in the following April. Gordon Brown, born February 20, 1951, Glasgow, Scotland, is a Scottish-born British Labour Party politician who served as Chancellor of the Exchequer, 1997 to 2007, and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, 2007 to 10. At the time of his elevation to Prime Minister, he had been the longest continuously serving Chancellor of the Exchequer since the 1820s. Brown was the son of John Brown, a Labour Party-supporting Church of Scotland minister, and Elizabeth Brown. At age 16 he won a scholarship to the University of Edinburgh, the youngest student to enter the university since World War II, where he immersed himself in student politics, eventually becoming chair of the university's Labour Club. Having earned a degree with honors in 1972, he served as a university lecturer, first at Edinburgh, 1975–76, and then at Glasgow College of Technology, now part of Glasgow Caledonian University, 1976–80. Brown left academia for an appointment at Scottish TV, 1980–83, where he was a journalist and editor in the Current Affairs Department. In 1982 he completed a doctorate in history at Edinburgh. His dissertation was titled The Labour Party and Political Change in Scotland, 1918–29. In 1974 Brown had helped organise the parliamentary campaign to elect Robin Cook, who would later serve in government with Brown as Foreign Minister, 1997–2001, and Leader of the House of Commons, 2001–03. Brown himself unsuccessfully stood for election to the House of Commons in 1979 for a seat representing Edinburgh before winning a seat in Parliament in 1983 as MP for Dunfermline East. He became friends with Tony Blair, another new MP, and the two soon found themselves at the forefront of the campaign to modernise Labour's political philosophy, replacing the goal of state socialism with a more pragmatic, market-friendly strategy. From 1987 he served in Labour's Shadow Cabinet, first as Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury and then as Shadow Trade and Industry Secretary. In 1992, following Labour's fourth successive electoral defeat, Brown was named Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer by John Smith, then the Labour Party leader. Brown was widely regarded as the senior half of the Blair-Brown partnership and the one more likely to eventually become party leader. When Smith died in 1994, however, Blair had overtaken Brown as the favoured candidate of party activists and the wider public. Brown reluctantly stepped aside, reportedly after Blair agreed to support Brown as his eventual successor. Speculation that a deal had been reached was confirmed by Brown in a 2010 interview, though he stated that the decision had not been made at a meeting in Granita, a London restaurant, as previously thought. In 1994 Blair won the party's leadership, and Brown was subsequently reappointed by Blair as Labour's Shadow Chancellor. Chancellor of the Exchequer. In the 1997 general election, Labour won a landslide victory, and Blair became Prime Minister. Brown was subsequently named Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he swiftly took control of almost all policies concerned with the United Kingdom's domestic economy. He immediately made his mark by ceding the power to set interest rates to the Bank of England, and in October 1997 he announced a set of 5 key economic tests that would have to be met before Britain adopted the euro. He was generally considered more sceptical than Blair regarding Britain's joining the euro. Brown disappointed many Labour supporters by largely retaining for the first 2 years the strict public spending policies he had inherited from the Conservatives, but by July 1998 he had drawn up new plans that allowed for significantly more spending on health, education, and overseas aid, starting in 1999. In October 1998, as chairman of the Group of 7 subgroup of finance ministers, Brown extended his influence and played a key role in helping to establish new international mechanisms to stabilize world financial markets. In 2000 Brown married Sarah Macaulay. Under Brown's leadership, Great Britain experienced a period of relatively steady economic growth, but increased public spending and government borrowing became growing concerns. Brown had a strong interest in international economics. He served as the United Kingdom's governor of the International Monetary Fund and as chair of the organization's primary decision-making committee, and was instrumental in brokering a European agreement in 2005 that would double foreign aid to developing countries. He also set out a policy aimed at environmental sustainability, arguing that for too long economic priorities and environmental protection were seen as mutually exclusive and that instead economic objectives and our environmental objectives now increasingly reinforce each other. The relationship between Blair and Brown had grown somewhat strained, with many loyal to Blair claiming that Brown's supporters had been undermining Blair's leadership for several years. Indeed, in June 2007 a leaked document surfaced showing that Blair had considered removing Brown as Chancellor of the Exchequer after the 2005 election. In September 2006, Shortly after, the Labour Party fared poorly in local elections, blamed in part on the party's support of the Iraq War. Blair announced that he would step down as Prime Minister within a year. Brown subsequently pledged his support for Blair, and Blair in turn later backed Brown to succeed him as Labour Party leader and Prime Minister. Prime Ministership of Gordon Brown. Brown faced no opposition in the campaign to succeed Blair as Labour Party leader, and on June 27, 2007, 3 days after he officially became Labour Party leader, Brown became Prime Minister. He pledged to make reform of the National Health Service a major priority, to retain the various public sector reforms that had been implemented by Blair, and to wage an unremitting battle against poverty. In foreign policy, Brown argued that the global fight against terrorism involves more than military force, and, though he had close ties with the United States and had been seen as somewhat more skeptical than Blair of many aspects of the European Union, EU, it was anticipated that he would pursue a course that focused British policy on British interests rather than on developing a closer relationship with either the United States or the EU. Brown's government was severely tested in 2008-09 when a worldwide financial crisis and ensuing recession hit Britain hard. His problems multiplied in the spring of 2009, when, against a backdrop of growing unemployment, a political scandal erupted, involving the widespread abuse of expense accounts by members of Parliament, including members of Brown's cabinet, some of whom resigned. A major cabinet reshuffle followed. Largely as a result of the scandal and the recession, Labour's popularity plummeted, and the party performed very poorly in local British elections and in elections for the European Parliament. Following the particularly disastrous European elections on June 4, 2009, when Labour secured only 15.7% of the vote across the British mainland, there were efforts once again to oust Brown as party leader. James Purnell, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, resigned from Brown's cabinet and claimed that Brown's continued leadership makes a Conservative victory more, not less likely. I am therefore calling on you to stand aside to give our party a fighting chance of winning. Brown's allies worked furiously to ensure that no other minister followed Purnell's example. None did, but Brown's authority was visibly weakened. To avoid a challenge, he met with Labour MPs and promised to change the way he led. Also in 2009, Brown's efforts to stimulate the economy produced an ever-increasing budget deficit, which weighed down the Prime Minister's poll ratings as a general election loomed. In January 2010, 2 former cabinet members called for a secret ballot on Brown's leadership, well in advance of the parliamentary election required by law to take place by June 3. Though support for Brown was slow in coming and lukewarm, no vote was taken, and he held on to the party leadership heading into the election. Brown agreed that before the election was held he would testify before the most recent and extensive inquiry into the conduct of the Iraq War. In 2010, the Prime Minister helped facilitate a deal between the Democratic Unionist Party and Sinn Féin that would devolve justice and policing power to Northern Ireland by April 2010. Stalemate over the issue had threatened possible suspension of devolution and the reimposition of direct rule from London. In the British general election on May 6, 2010, the Labour Party lost its majority in the House of Commons, finishing second to the Conservatives, but no party achieved a majority. Shortly thereafter, Brown announced that he would be stepping down as Labour leader. On May 11, after negotiations to form a coalition government with the third-place finishing Liberal Democrats failed, Brown tendered his resignation as Prime Minister. In 2012, Brown was named UN Special Envoy for Global Education. He wrote several books, including The Politics of Nationalism and Devolution, 1980, with H. M. Drucker, Maxton, 1986, Where There Is Greed, 1989, John Smith, 1994, with James Naughtie, Beyond the Crash, Overcoming the First Crisis of Globalization, 2010, and My Scotland, Our Britain, A Future Worth Sharing, 2014. In the last book, Brown outlined a plan for a new role for Scotland within the United Kingdom, and he became an important spokesman for continued union as the September 18, 2014, referendum on independence for Scotland approached. Brown called for a debate to be held in the House of Commons on the future of the Union in the event that the referendum was defeated. He also proposed codification of the purpose of the United Kingdom akin to the U.S. Declaration of Independence, recognition of the Scottish Parliament as permanent and indissoluble, and increased income taxing powers for Scotland. His impassioned speech in favour of union on the eve of the vote was considered by many to be among the finest of his career. Brown's very visible role in contributing to the defeat of the referendum, with about 55% voting against independence and about 45% for it, seemed to promise a return to political prominence for a man many had come to see as a failed prime minister. Brown chose not to stand again for his seat in the May 2015 parliamentary election. Thank you for watching this video.